I left the Jedi path to find my own way, and for a long time I felt lost. Then through compassion and helping others, I found my true purpose and direction.
How you get so big into food of this kind?
Hello, and welcome to this week's spoiler review for Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7. Today we're talking about the episode Gone with a Trace, a punny name based on a new character brought about in this Ahsoka Tano arc. I know this arc has been the first of things that people have really been waiting for with the season. If you kind of see the Clone Wars as being about the Jedi or about Ahsoka specifically, this is really where the show picks up for you, this, midpoint in the episodes that we're getting. Personally, I was very excited to see what was going to happen in this arc. This is the arc I probably know the least amount about of the two, considering I had kind of sort of seen Bad Batch, and a lot of what we know about in the last arc was kind of told in some other sources. I'm sure there's plenty of surprises ahead in that one, but I kind of know what I'm getting into. This one I have no real idea. It's just kind of loosely referred to as the Ahsoka Walkabout arc. It's basically Ahsoka right after she leaves the Jedi Order and her journey into finding her way until the story that we would see in the Ahsoka novel by E.K. Johnston. Obviously, we're going to see more of Ahsoka in the final arc of the series as well after this, but for now, this is kind of just some close personal time with Ahsoka. My overall feelings on this episode was that the episode was stunningly beautiful, and it was something that I felt was more character-driven than any other episode of the Clone Wars I have seen, and Clone Wars is a pretty character-driven show. I mean, it's a show that was not afraid to devote a whole arc to understanding a particular character, whether it was younglings on an adventure for the first time, young Boba Fett kind of finding his way. This is certainly not the first time we've spent time with Ahsoka and gone with her on a journey, but this was something that felt more like the story itself was connecting to Ahsoka as a character, as opposed to having a larger story. And there was one. We met these sisters, and we saw one is in debt. It was a very classic kind of Star Wars story built in, but it was really this story that served as the lattice for the vine of this Ahsoka exploration to grow out of. I thought that was something very nice, especially coming off of the Bad Batch arc, which was so intense, so action-packed. And if you kind of look in this, if you were to binge watch this, this would be following, like, you would have the Yoda episodes, and then Bad Batch, and then you would have this. So it would be, we've not spent a lot of time with Ahsoka. There have been several episodes, really, since we've seen Ahsoka, other than her as visions in the Yoda's episodes, and then we're coming to see her again. So I thought this first episode was wonderfully constructed. I thought the animation was beautiful. The facial animations were beyond anything that had been in the show prior, so it really shows how far they've come through animation, largely in Rebels, since it was the same animation style, but even stuff that they found through Resistance, I'm sure, in some way helped. And just as technology has come forward, I thought it was amazing. The visuals, the framing, just the shot where Ahsoka is taking in the area was really wonderful. And the setting itself is really cool. So for this, you kind of have to rewind back to Star Wars of old, back before the Disney buyout, to know what we were kind of getting at the time. See, if you remember in the Ahsoka arc where she leaves the Order, the end of Season 5, there's mention of, I think it's levels 1311 and 1312 in those episodes. You stop just short of 1313. And the level she's at in this episode is level 1313. At the time these were getting made, there was supposed to be a Star Wars video game called Star Wars 1313, and it was going to be, I don't know, it was probably going to be kind of the spiritual successor to the Force Unleashed games. Probably what Jedi Fallen Order became, only it was going to be about a bounty hunter, not a Jedi. It was going to take place on this level, and we were seeing all of this interconnectivity in Star Wars canon at the time, the largest piece being Star Wars The Clone Wars. There was also rumors of a Star Wars Underworld TV show, which never saw the light of day, but it was supposed to be the first Star Wars live-action show that was getting developed for a long time. Anyway, none of this really has to do with anything with the episode, other than it's just a piece of context that would have been really important. At the time, we would have been getting these episodes had the Disney buyout never happened, had canon continued as it did. In theory, we would have been seeing these episodes air around the same time as a live-action TV show, and seeing the kind of integration we're seeing in canon now, where you'll see Baby Yoda use a force power that pops up in The Rise of Skywalker. You know, this was something that they were trying to do, and then they wiped the slate clean with canon, started over, and now we're seeing that interconnectivity that they wanted then. Now, with the episode itself, I said it had a punny title, as you, I'm sure, connected. Trace. Trace is a new character, friend of Ahsoka. In this episode, Trace was originally supposed to be a male character, and in this re-envisioning became a female character, which I think is good. Ahsoka's spent a lot of time with her Jedi bros, and that's certainly good, but it's nice to see her kind of get to formulate some female relationships. She really only had Padme back in the day, and she could only get so close to Padme because Padme thought she was really good at keeping a really big secret from Ahsoka, which I'm sure was not much of a secret at all. We see this connection between these two characters, and I mean, it's the classic, the character Trace says it herself, Ahsoka falls out of the sky and lands right in her garage, and so it's this kind of meeting of fate. Trace becomes immediately enamored with Ahsoka, this kind of mysterious person that just fell into her life, and what this might mean. Trace is that person who's, again, got a very classic Star Wars tale. She wants to be a pilot. She's fixing up her ship. She sees her ship as her way off this rock, and she can go out and journey and make her way. We're used to seeing this from backwater worlds and not from characters who are in the hub of the city, of the galaxy on Coruscant, but it is kind of that same Star Wars tale told in a slightly different way, and I think that's a good thing. I like that Star Wars kind of has these classic archetypes in of themselves. You know, Star Wars was kind of based on mythological archetypes, but now it has its own mythology that's so rich, where you can go, this is the pilot who wants to find their way in the galaxy, and this is the wayward Jedi, and this is, you know, the kind of scummy older sibling but has a heart kind of character. Like, if you think back to Legends, Knights of the Old Republic game, think Griff to Mission Veo, that kind of character, if that means anything to you guys. But I liked seeing the iterations of a theme. I think Star Wars is really strong when it can present something to you that you've seen before, but mix it up, change it up, present it in that slightly different light, and I think that's what this episode did. But of course, this episode is largely about Ahsoka because we're trying to find her way. I liked seeing her use her Jedi skills in new ways, in these non-Jedi ways. You know, she's riding the speeder, and the speeder crashes, and she has to survive, but it's not because it was shot down by a droid, and it's not because she's on a battlefield, it's because she's using a speeder bike and the engine gives out. We see that she's very good at fixing her speeder. This is largely Anakin's influence, I'm sure. I liked the interactions between her and Trace at this point, because Trace is clearly trying to impress her. Trace is clearly just, again, instantly trying to figure out why this person has fallen into her lap, essentially, and is trying to be like, hey, I can fix your speeder, and I can help you, and you can stay here, but for a price. You know, still trying to kind of like play that tough guy role, for a lack of a better word. And Ahsoka's having none of it. She's like, no, I can fix my speeder. I can handle this. Like, you should be aware. I can't pay you a whole lot. Like, she's not super interested in making a connection, where Trace is super interested in making a connection. I just like, Trace is somebody that you can be instantly okay with. Like, you're not, something about Trace, there's just no reason to have your guard up the way her character is presented. Like, she's not being a jerk about knowing a lot about mechanics. She's just clearly trying to be like, hey, I'm a good mechanic. Hey, I'm trying to be a scoundrel, got that kind of Han Solo, but you're really the good guy thing going on. Seeing their interactions in general, it reminds me just how far Ahsoka has come, because I'm presuming Trace and Ahsoka are probably fairly close in age. There might be a critical couple year difference in there. I think their ages are out there, but they just, they weren't clearly presented within the episode. But you're seeing this, and Ahsoka is, mature isn't even the right word, because Trace isn't necessarily immature. She's somebody who's taking care of herself on the street. She has to have some level of ability to do that, and some level of internal discipline in order to be able to do that. But, Ahsoka grew up a Jedi, and has been on the battlefield, and has seen things, and there's just this different kind of old soul weight to everything Ahsoka does, versus Trace, who's still kind of in the midst of an adventure. And it makes me think about the interactions Ahsoka has in the Ahsoka novel, also, where she's kind of around people her own age, but still seems old for her years. because of what she's gone through, and just constantly seeing her try to connect to people. There's a point later on in the episode where she and Trace are working on some droids, and Trace makes a comment about, oh, you know everything, and Ahsoka says, oh, I don't know everything, I'm still trying to figure people out. And I thought that was a really interesting line. I'm sure people who've spent more time analyzing Ahsoka as a character have noted this more clearly than I have, but that was something that made me stop and think, because in my mind, I would think of Ahsoka as somebody who does get people. Like, she's incredibly empathetic, and she works together with Anakin and Obi-Wan so well, but really at the end of the day, the Jedi do not function like normal people, and the average everyday person is definitely somebody that Ahsoka would try to figure out and try to connect to. She has lived in this different world. There's constant references to her being from the upper levels of Coruscant, but she's not just from the upper levels of Coruscant, she's from the Jedi Temple on the upper levels of Coruscant, and that's just a level of removed that's just leagues beyond just being from the surface, Trace also describes the Jedi, starts talking about the Jedi, and I find this particularly interesting anytime we get public opinion on the Jedi. It's very easy to have an opinion of the Jedi based off of our adventures with them, but what does the average person think? And Trace kind of sees the Jedi as starting the war, and if they didn't start it, they're certainly not trying to stop it, and she kind of has this disillusionment with them. She mentions, every kid grows up hearing stories, and then you get let down because the Jedi aren't those stories. And, it makes me wonder, is it that the Jedi aren't living up to the stories, or is it that the stories are nothing like what a Jedi actually is? Where does that dissonance come from? But what I really appreciated in this scene is watching the conflict on Ahsoka's face. She's somebody who has been greatly wronged by the Jedi. That is why she's in the position she's in now. She has been hurt by the Jedi Council. She's been hurt by Jedi that she trusts. She's walked away from that. And here she found somebody who's saying things about how the Jedi have forgotten people and the Jedi have left people behind. And that's certainly how she would be feeling as a Jedi, but the Jedi are also her family, even if they're a family she left, even if they're a family she doesn't consider family anymore. They're the people who raised her, and there's always going to be that instinct to be like, well, no, I have to talk about these people, I have to defend them, but do I really have to defend them, and do I even want to have to defend them? I thought that was conveyed really well, not so much in any particular thing that Ahsoka said, but in all the things she didn't say. Like, the way her facial animation was, you could tell she wanted to say so much and couldn't, and her lack of being able to say anything, to me, is what spoke volumes about the conflict within her. And that conflict is shown too when Ahsoka almost leaves Trace. Trace is kind of getting on her, saying, oh, you don't really act like you're around here. Why are you in such a hurry to get out of here? Are you running from something? And the accusation that she's running from something kind of makes Ahsoka run. Like, she's already just dealing with the what did I do? Like, Ahsoka is looking at Trace and says this, maybe this was a mistake, I don't know what I'm doing here. And yeah, that could be about maybe bringing her bike into that garage was a mistake, and maybe it was, why did I leave the Jedi, and was this a mistake? Ahsoka is at a point where she's just completely 180'd her life and is dealing with that, and even if this is ultimately a better decision for her to leave the Jedi Order, she's still going to wonder if it was the best decision for her until she finds her place again. While she's wandering, it's totally normal to wonder, why did I really wander? Why didn't I stay in my comfortable place, even if my comfortable place wasn't perfect? What she's not saying is what was really speaking to me in this episode. As all of this is going on, somebody shows up and uses some goons to try to get some money out of Trace, and they get into a fight. Trace is very adamant that Ahsoka doesn't get into the fight. Trace, she's kind of standing on her own 2 feet, but she definitely isn't good enough to stop 2 people, and that's when Ahsoka gets involved, and Ahsoka just kicks the stuff out of these guys. She still has her skills. She has not had enough time to go rusty, and the bad guys run off, and Trace is like, man, where'd you learn all that? And the part of this episode that got me the hardest was she explains it as my older brother taught me. It hit right in the feels that Ahsoka, I mean, Anakin was her older brother, and that line was my favorite in the episode, I think. From there, they run off to meet Rafa, Trace's sister, and Rafa is that kind of always has a plan, always has a scam, always trying to get ahead type of person. She's trying to work her way up to being a more known name, so they can make a name for themselves and have some money and have the freedom to do what they need to do. And you can tell in their relationship that she does care about Trace. She is concerned when she finds out that Trace got beat up because she didn't pay somebody off, or at least warn Trace that they were coming. But that concern, while there, is not enough to make her stop and go, no, I need to stop doing scams. And so you have that conflict within her character. Just as a fun aside, she says "moof milker," which has been in Star Wars vernacular since The Force Awakens, and so it was cool to see that connection. Also, a lot of Tuca cats running around, which is kind of more of a Rebels reference than anything else, but just cool to see that and then have our space cats come into the story. So just a lot of neat connections going on. But anyway, somebody shows up, says, hey, I need you to make me these 3 droids. This is part of Rafa's scam. She gets Trace to work on it, so Trace and Ahsoka are working on the droids. This is where Ahsoka's I don't get people line comes in. And they're talking about these droids, and Ahsoka becomes aware that these droids are actually really, really dangerous. And one gets on the loose, and she and Trace have to track them down. And this chase sequence was a lot of fun. It was really cool to see an action sequence in Star Wars, in the Clone Wars, that really wasn't critical to anything. Like, you are literally just watching Ahsoka and Trace have antics in the passageways. Like, there's no plans on the line, there's no lives on the line, other than this droid could potentially hurt someone. It was something that was more serious, but at the same time more lighthearted than what we've seen in a lot of other Clone Wars. I also just like Ahsoka's dynamic with Trace throughout this episode. She's never pushy, she's never like, look, Trace, I get that you live here, but I'm actually pretty cool, and I know how to do these things, so let me tell you how we're going to track this droid down. Like, she's letting Trace handle it and call the shots and make the decisions, and she's following Trace's lead up until the point where Trace needs help, and then she steps in. And she's almost, I don't know, I feel like Trace has an interest in her, and Ahsoka is not really at a place where she's going to even consider something like that, and is acting more like an older sibling, because the older sibling relationship is always what's been modeled for her. That's what she saw in Anakin. That's largely what Obi-Wan was to Anakin. So even when she's around Obi-Wan, it's almost like an older sibling in a way. You know, she saw brotherhood with the clones. I think Ahsoka largely doesn't know how to have kinship in any other way other than siblingship, and that's what she's always understood. And so that, to me, is how she's treating Trace. We'll see where they decide to take how these two interact as the episodes go. I don't think that's a permanent state. I think that's just a reflection of how Ahsoka knows how to interact with people at this time. You could see that in this, where she was largely letting Trace do what Trace needed to do, and not overstepping that. Up until the end, where she's trying to do everything without too much clear Force usage. Obviously, the Force would augment any of her fighting abilities, but that's not something that's obviously clearly noticeable. You get to the end where Trace and the droid are on the cart, and it's going over the edge, and the rope isn't enough, and she uses the Force to pull it back up. No one really sees it because they're distracted by the cart, except for the one very surprised child. But Ahsoka uses the Force to save them, and nobody else is really aware. Obviously, she has to be careful revealing that part of herself to Trace, which may happen, because in the end, they get the droids fixed up, they meet at this wharf, and this wharf was one of the coolest places on Coruscant I'd ever seen. This notion that there's water. I don't know if it's like truly the bottom of the planet, and so that's where there's water, or if there's just like a level where somebody built water, if this is a level where water collects. I don't know what this wharf is, but I'm fascinated by it. But it was a really cool meet-up place. You see Trace and Rafa interact here. Rafa gives these dangerous droids back after Ahsoka and Trace both said she shouldn't, that it shouldn't be about the money, that they should just get rid of the droids, because the droids are dangerous. They're this very dangerous model, but Rafa wants the money anyway. She can pay off her debt, give a little bit of money to Trace, and Trace has to figure out how to handle this, you know, thinking that her sister is not right, but her sister's trying, and wanting to have that good relationship with her sister, because it's probably all she has. Then in the end, walking off with Ahsoka, and you can see clearly, again, Trace has the desire to keep Ahsoka around and keep Ahsoka close. And so we'll see where that goes, because as I understand it, the rest of this arc is going to continue to involve them. And that could come into some conflict, because it does not seem like Ahsoka and Rafa get along well at all. But those are really my thoughts. I don't really know or have enough to say on where this episode's gonna go. I honestly haven't even really read future episode descriptions, even though I know they're out there. just because I want to enjoy the episodes as it comes. So I very intentionally stayed away from reading too far ahead, because I'm excited for this arc where I actually don't know a lot of what's going to happen. But those are my thoughts. Leave a comment letting me know of what you think of the episode so far. If you're not already, follow us on all of the socials, and until next time, keep it real and fly casual.
Cooking can be fun.